Well, I'm joined now by Labour's Rushanara Ali and Tony Sewell, founder of Generating Genius, which was set up to help students from disadvantaged communities get into top universities. And the Conservative MP, Kwasi Kwarteng, is also with us. Rushanara Ali, why is your side quite cross about this?
Well, the government has commissioned lots of reports. The Social Mobility Commission, led by Alan Milburn, highlighted the major socio-economic problems that need to be addressed. And this is yet another one, the Commission on Integration. There'll be another report coming out. And we feel pretty frustrated by the fact that the government hasn't really put much focus on where the problems can be addressed and how they can be addressed.
But don't you feel just publishing the numbers will in itself prompt action?
Well, the numbers have been published over and over again. You know, go back 10, 15 years. I mean, I've been working on these issues for a long time. The numbers on black boys, black Caribbean boys and white working class boys and their poor attainment levels is pretty much the same. It's been going on for a long time. Successive governments have done studies. What we need is action. And the second thing is that if the government put some effort into which policies had a negative impact on ethnic minorities and white working class young people, for instance, they would find that education maintenance cuts, FE funding cuts where predominantly working class and ethnic minority groups are concentrated, those policies have a detrimental effect on these groups that's the subject of the study. So instead of looking at the problem later, it's much better to use the legislative provision to do the impact assessment and put the preemptive action in place to stop this from happening. And that's not been happening.
You've criticised this, but from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think the narrative is wrong. I think actually the word from 10 years ago, I would argue that in fact it's very positive. And in fact, what an audit like this does, it knocks out the kind of agency, the ability of, I think, young people in particular to really kind of own what is and celebrate really what is a positive story. I mean,
But you've got to look. What's wrong with pointing it out?
Well, I mean, there's not, you point out what you like, but I mean, the issue is what impact does it have? So, for example, you may well be, and it came out in that clip you had, you may be well feeding in to a notion of victimhood, a notion that basically I can't do because the general narrative, everybody is saying.
Do you really think black and Asian people think that?
Yes.
They feel like
without any doubt. I'll tell you why. I mean, my programme really kind of deals with that. Let me give you one.
I mean, I don't know.
I'll give you one clear example of how that works. It even works with kids. In that report, it talks about the arts and it talks about actors and opening up the arts for a community and going after that. Really and truly, what are the real reasons why actors can't get work in Britain? Is it really about racism? When black actors have gone to America, what's really made them better than their American counterparts is they've been classically trained. They're better than their African American counterparts.
Kwasi Kwarteng, when you're getting it from both sides here.
Well, I think that a lot of what Tony is saying is right. I think there are positive stories. There's also a negative story. But it's an audit. It's not something that's going to say one thing or another. And I think what Rushanara's response showed was a certain churlishness, because this is the first time a government has actually taken a step like this to have an audit. I think, as you've seen, it's precipitated a large measure of debate. People are engaged in the issue. We're talking about it. We're here.
When you say you agree with Tony, I mean, you're saying you think it does feed a victim mentality?
I don't agree with that bit. I think there are positive stories. I mean, my parents came to Britain in the 1960s. I grew up in London in the 80s. We've come a long way as a society in dealing with a lot of these issues. Now, we haven't reached a point of perfection, but I think what the government is doing is a very credible, sober and intelligent way of trying to deal with these issues.
Kwasi, it's not churlish to point out that there are massive inequalities and talent is being wasted, and there is a responsibility for the government to address that. And I think that this report, while evidence is always welcome, it's repeating ground that's been covered for a long time. What we need focus on is dealing with the underlying problems that exist, and that's in educational attainment. We've made huge progress. In my constituency, we now have very high levels of attainment, but when people get to work, there's a lot of discrimination that kicks in. So the government needs to focus on the action. That is not churlish. It's about making sure that the response
And what do you
is
think
there.
of Tony Sewell's criticism?
Well, I think, I share Tony's points about making sure young people don't get stigmatized. They have role models, they have support, and they get they're able to fulfill their aspirations, and they're not constantly told they're disadvantaged. I went to a school.
There is a danger, though. There is a danger that you could get, and we see this in particularly in the judicial system, where black men are more likely to plead guilty because they're suspicious of the system. And what you do is you get a sense that a lot of young people then, particularly from different ethnic backgrounds, just become so suspicious of the system they give up. They don't want to engage with it anymore, and they go somewhere else. And that's because you're continually pushing a narrative that black people can't succeed in this. That almost you're whispering in their ear that look, however hard you try in this, the system is stacked against you.
But isn't it honest to say to them, you might get to university, but you're less likely to get a job? That's just a fact. So you've got to do something about that.
But there's nothing wrong with saying that. But you see, it depends on how you see the world. And if in fact the word, I mean, certain lobby groups are coming out and saying that the world is framed in this way, you can't move on it.
Just very briefly.
I think that this audit is to be welcomed. I think the fact that we're sitting around here having a debate, we're talking very frankly about difficult issues. We haven't mentioned the fact that social class also has an element in this. We haven't addressed that. But I think this is a healthy part of democracy, and I think the government audit, should be welcomed for that reason.
We must leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed.